when you have COPD, it can be hard to breathe. So my doctor said,
Symbicort can help you breathe better, starting within 5 minutes. It doesn't replace a rescue inhaler for sudden symptoms. Symbicort helps provide significant improvement of your lung function. Symbicort is for COPD, including chronic bronchitis and emphysema. It should not be taken more than twice a day. It may increase your risk of lung infections, osteoporosis, and some eye problems. Tell your doctor if you have a heart condition or high blood pressure before taking it.
Symbicort could mean a day with better breathing. Watch out, Piggy.
Get Symbicort free at saveonsymbicort.com. If you can't afford your medication, AstraZeneca may be able to help.
Your hair is so soft. Did you use Head & Shoulders 2-in-1?
I did, Mom. Wanna try it?
Yes.
It intensely moisturizes your hair and scalp and keeps you flake-free.
Manolo, look at my soft hair. I should be in the shot now, too. Try Head & Shoulders 2-in-1.
Some believe if it's not German, it's not luxury performance. So we brought these Infiniti SUVs to Germany with American families to drive them.
This truck is only for German luxury auto, not for family or SUV.
VC Turbo. It's like 2 engines in one. How did Germany not do that first?
Keine Kinder auf der Strecke.
The Infiniti family of SUVs. There's nothing traditional about it. Lease the Infiniti QX50 for $399 a month at the Start Your Own Legacy summer sales event. Infiniti. Empower the drive.
What's amazing about Babbel is that it's very engaging and it's fun, and in a very short period of time, within 3 weeks, you're speaking Spanish.
Babbel, the quick way to get conversational in a new language. Babbel's award-winning interactive technology gets you speaking right away.
I love Babbel because it's like having a tutor in your hand. Babbel enabled me to gain confidence very quickly, which is amazing.
So, which language do you want to speak today? Now, you can try Babbel free, the #1 selling language learning app in the world.
I love going to Mexico, and while I enjoy surfing and seeing the sights, what's most important to me is that human connection. Now, when I'm meeting new friends at the beach, I can engage in Spanish, and they can understand me, which is a very rewarding experience thanks to Babbel.
Try Babbel free today. Go to Babbel.com or download the app and see why Babbel is the quick way to get conversational in a new language. Babbel, which language do you want to speak today?
That is a wrap of this hour of MSNBC Live. I'm Alex Wood. I look forward to seeing you all again at noon Eastern. Right now, it is time for AM Joy, and sitting in for Joy is my friend, the Reverend Al Sharpton. So buckle up, everyone.
I think he's out of control. He has the steering wheel of the American vehicle in his hands, and he's veering wildly right now. He's trying to preserve and protect himself. And so what more demonstration do you want? When things get really, really bad? You know, I'm glad that if his revoking of my security clearance is going to wake some people up.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. I'm Al Sharpton in for Joy Reid. In his first on-camera interview since Donald Trump revoked his security clearance, former CIA Director John Brennan fired back on the Rachel Maddow show.
I know that there is a question about whether or not there's corrupt intent in terms of doing this. And so I think this is the thing that lawyers and courts and others are going to be looking at in terms of whether or not Mr. Trump is doing any of this in order to obstruct justice or to try to silence critics, whatever. But the fact that he's using a security clearance of a former CIA director as a pawn in his public relations strategy, I think is just so reflective of somebody who, quite frankly, I don't want to use this term maybe, but he's drunk on power. He really is. And I think he's abusing the powers of that office.
Joining me now is Danny Savalos, legal analyst at MSNBC, Nada Bakos, former CIA analyst, Naveed Jamali, Intel analyst at MSNBC, and Republican strategist Matt Makoviak. Let me go to you first. And ask you, Danny, drunk on power. I mean, those are strong words from Brennan, who was always a very low-key, more kind of thoughtful guy than a guy that was given to make statements. Drunk on power, would it have brought him to the place where maybe he did obstruct justice? Maybe he is trying to silence dissent. I mean, is it all the above, or is he doing something that he has the power to do, and it's about time a president does it?
In theory, under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president is the classifier in chief. He decides what is secret, top secret, and everything else. But there is an established procedure by way of executive order for deciding whether or not to pool or grant security clearances. The president can bypass that in the case of national security issues, but he has to articulate that. And I think that's why you see him making that point in his statements that this is a national security type issue. But ultimately, he might just say, look, under Article 2, I have the inherent power as the president to do this. Procedure aside, I can do it any way I want. I can tweet it. I can just make an announcement summarily. I can do it however I like.
Now, Nate, that is what is in the Constitution. That's how the powers are there. But we've not seen a president really use this in such an overt, direct way. Is this an abuse of power?
I think it is an abuse of power. I signed a letter along with 75 of my former CIA colleagues yesterday stating that we believe that the president is applying a political litmus test to who should have a security clearance. I don't think it should be applied this way. I do think he should follow process and procedures. It should be based on a national security decision, not on whether or not someone agrees or disagrees with the president.
Now, in saying that, I think, Matt, that you as a Republican, there has been Republican presidents before, they've been attacked before, they've been questioned on policy before. Have we ever seen a president do what is being done now in terms of security clearances? And if not, why not? And how does the Republican Party stand behind this president doing this?
Well, you asked 3 questions there, Reverend. Those were all good ones.
I counted.
And listen, I mean, I've held a security clearance when I worked at the Department of Homeland Security in the Bush administration. Nate has also held a security clearance. We have never, to answer your question, Reverend, no, we've never seen a president choose to revoke a security clearance for one individual. It's never been done before. Honestly, most presidents would not get into the weeds on that. They would basically sort of leave that to the intelligence professionals in the intelligence community that ultimately make the decisions about when security clearances can be granted or not. So here's what my problem with what President Trump has done here. It does appear that there's no standard, there's no objective standard as to why he's making this decision. And I think that could be dangerous going forward. I don't think that we should be doing this where Republican presidents pull security clearances of Democrats and then vice versa when the parties switch power in Washington. That's not the way the intelligence community should operate by any stretch. That said, Brennan has certainly gone beyond where most intelligence professionals have gone in some of the language he's used. That doesn't mean that he should have his security clearance revoked, but he's clearly gone out of being sort of a traditional intelligence professional and leader and into almost a sort of
But is he limited? I
position.
mean, there's nothing that says that he cannot express his opinion. I mean, he may be doing something that others in the intelligence community didn't do before, but it doesn't mean that he was bound not to do it. He's not violating anything.
Well, so as it relates to the security clearance, what matters is, are you protecting classified information at all times? And that is the standard that's required. You know, a security clearance is not a birthright, and just because you have one doesn't mean you can always have one. And so that will be, that to me would be a really good standard, right? If President Trump was looking at it and saying, listen, we now have reason to believe that in this case he violated the protection of classified information, that would be a good standard. But I agree, his over-the-top rhetoric about the president, from my standpoint, I don't think is a particular reason why you should revoke a security clearance.
And Naveed, I think that's the point. The president has not cited that I'm removing his clearance because he has compromised us with this inside security information. He has basically given his view on the president, which last time I checked is not necessarily a security risk to have a political opinion or an assessment of a sitting president. And my question to you is, this president who on one hand is calling a investigation on Russian collusion to undermine the American voter a witch hunt, but he wants to, in some ways, protect us from political views by removing things that have nothing to do with our security. Seems to me a little contradictory.
You're 100% right. Look, I currently hold a top secret clearance. I'm currently a reservist in the United States Navy. I'm an intelligence officer. I'm also an MSNBC analyst, and I come on MSNBC and express my opinion, and I've been very lucky to do so. There's a fine line here, but let me explain to your point, Reverend, why what the president did is so chilling. It's not chilling for someone like Brennan, who's retired, and look, the impact to him is going to be minimal. But someone who joined the military post 9/11 and who was taught very specifically from the lessons of 9/11 that intelligence professionals are trained, are encouraged, go out there, make a mistake. Don't be afraid to say something that goes against the grain. We want people, because of 9/11, we want people, intelligence professionals, to say things that maybe their commanders don't agree with, maybe their superiors don't agree with. That's the point. And by punishing someone, it doesn't matter about the clearance, but by singling out and punishing people, you are essentially going backwards from everything that we've done post 9/11 in terms of making this country safer by encouraging thoughtful debate, by encouraging thoughtful analysis, and potentially encouraging people who have a minority view in the intelligence community to speak up. You don't want to silence those voices, and that's exactly what the president has just done.
And Danny, it also impacts people's lives. I mean, if you are going to his point about Brennan's retired, but what about young people that want to go forward and they get the security clearance and then they may want to pursue a career in life? It's on your resume that you had your security clearance removed by the President of the United States. This affects you the rest of your career.
It's absolutely true. In a military environment, in an intelligence environment, these are highly chain of command specific positions, and people who achieve enough to get those jobs are very concerned about their resume, and a mark like this for a young up-and-coming agent or somebody in the national security or intelligence industry is going to be really disincentivized to be involved or serve their country or do anything if they think they're going to get this kind of checkmark. And I should add that these kinds of determinations are probably not reviewable by courts. So these people who have their security clearances revoked, at least according to a Supreme Court case involving the Department of the Navy, they probably have no recourse.
And this is what makes it so scary to me, because that effect of saying I can't afford, if I'm in intelligence, if I want to do something later in my career, I can't afford to speak my mind even in private because I could have this against me. And that is where we're going toward a almost totalitarian type of state, walking slowly there, but headed that way, when people are afraid for political reasons to exercise their freedom of speech. Nada, that is the threat here to me.
I think that is a valid threat. And from an intelligence perspective, and especially at the CIA, we're taught from a very early on, when we first joined the agency, that we are supposed to have objective viewpoints when it comes to communicating with policymakers, when it comes to making decisions about national security. I was sitting next to Democrats, Republicans, independents, liberals, conservatives, socialists, libertarians, but I never really knew it because we didn't discuss in our work environment what our personal political views are. But we knew that we had the right and the ability to choose what it is we wanted to pursue outside of work. So I think the danger is there's so many things that an intelligence professional has to be careful of, especially when they have a security clearance. This is adding an undue burden upon these people because this is not something that should be applied to an intelligence professional outside of their work. They should be able to publicly, when they have left the agency, as I have, talk about their own opinions, and quite often informed opinions. And I think that adding to the public debate is what is so important.
Naveed, it also, people need to understand, one of the reasons that it is important that some people that have had experience, like Nada, and all the way to Mr. Brennan, those that are there now, that are dealing with issues like Turkey or the Middle East or whatever the issue may be, needs to be able to glean from them their counsel, their experience, their advice, their contacts, because you're going in parts of the world that if you're in a new administration, you may not know people that they would know. With their security clearance taken away, it limits you being able to glean from those that could give you actual things that can help secure the American public. And to have that snatched back because somebody said something you don't like and you are thin-skinned politically, to me, could affect the security of American citizens.
You're 100% right. Look, to the lowest level, intelligence analyst, the 19 or 20-year-old kid, what you want to encourage them is to speak their mind, to have, when they're looking at intelligence, when they're analyzing, when they're making a product, you want them to assess it and give their assessment. What they see is that assessment. We don't want to limit that. We don't want them to worry that if they get the wrong assessment, if they say the wrong thing, that they could lose their security clearance. My goodness, what a horrible message. That's not at all the message we should be conveying to these young kids that are at the front line analyzing this intelligence. You're 100% right, Reverend. I mean, this is not the message, and it's on one level it's about Brennan, but on the other level, for the average American, the part they don't see are those kids and the professionals today that are working on this stuff, and the chilling message that it says to them that if you get your assessment wrong, if your assessment is something that is viewed as political, that is viewed as not going with the contrarian viewpoint, you might lose your clearance. That's not the message at all we want to send to people. We don't want to send to people that their assessment is going to have an impact on their career. That's just a wrong message. And at the end of the day, exactly what you said, that impacts the security, the national security of this country, and it's something that we should all be incredibly disturbed about.
Matt, you're the Republican here. I don't want everybody saying you're right, Reverend. So where am I wrong here? I mean, or is this something that you and other Republicans have to say, even I can't ride with the president on this?
Well, let's make one distinction. The list that the president and the White House have put out of people whose clearances are being considered for revocation, it only includes, I think, one current government employee, which I believe is Bruce Orr, who still works at the Justice Department. There's been a lot of questions about his time there. Everyone else is a former government employee. And so, yes, if it got to a point where an individual, soldier or individual intelligence analyst in one of the intelligence agencies was on that list, that would be totally unacceptable from my standpoint. I don't think that's where we are. I think he's looking instead at these particular individuals.
We need to be able to counsel with former people. We need to glean from their contacts, their information. Just because they're former doesn't mean they could not be useful. We are talking about the security of American citizens.
Can I just say something respectfully, Matt? I know what you're saying, that these are former people, and yes, it doesn't necessarily impact the day-to-day of the intelligence community. But you're mistaken if you don't think that those 19 and 20-year-old kids don't read the paper, don't watch CNN or MSNBC. They're going to look at this, and it's going to have an impact on how they want to do their assessments. That's a chilling, chilling message. It's a message from the commander-in-chief that basically says, as an intelligence professional, if I don't like your counsel for political reasons, I'm going to ruin your career. That is the wrong message that we want to send to people. It's shocking.
Matt, quickly, because I'm out of time.
Yeah, it's not about the council. It's about the fact that Brennan has spent the last year really being totally over the top in the things he said about the president. He does it with credibility because not only was he a former CIA director, but he has a current security clearance. I think that is the issue. Again, I'm not comfortable with how this was done. I think there needs to be an objective standard. I've made that clear. But I think that's what this is about. And so some 22-year-old in one of the intelligence agencies who's writing a report that's going to go through 4 layers before it goes anywhere meaningful, I don't think they're at any risk.
I'm going to bring you back. You're going to join me again later in the show. You're holding up, Matt. That's right. Hold your ground, even if it's shaky ground. Hold it anyway. Up next, a Trump campaign aide faces jail time. Stay with us.